Animation has limitless potential for storytelling, for expression of self, for exhibiting technical prowess, and of course for scaring the ever-living daylights out of folks. And who consumes the most animation? Well, unless you're a hardcore animation fan, it's probably kids. There are more cartoons marketed towards kids than there might ever be for a more mature audience. But that doesn't mean that kids' cartoons can't be a little grown up from time to time. In fact, a whole slew of lastingly scary monsters spawn from the so-called safe world of children's animation. Kids pick up on more than you think. They're just smaller people after all. Hello horror heads and welcome back to the Scariest channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos. I'm your horror host, Keegan Hughes, and today we're going to be counting down the top 5 scariest monsters from kids' cartoons. Before we get started, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more childhood trauma. Perfect, let's begin. Kicking us off at number 5, we've got CatDog. CatDog is an abomination and you can't convince me otherwise. It's literally a cat and a dog fused at the midsection. Whatever genetic experiment spawned this must have been gruesome. They share a body, but it's not so simple as them always acting together and experiencing the same things. No. How do they use the bathroom? Why are they so stretchy? Tell me how they have 2 separate immune systems. I need to know. These are all things that my gigantic, pure as snow child brain couldn't comprehend way back in the day. In fact, I think most folks were so focused on the goofy aspects of the show that they totally glossed over some of the more disturbing fare. See, CatDog is a lot more body horror than one might remember. Of course, they spend a lot of time in each other's mouths, like a nasty Ouroboros of sorts. This was taken to an extreme once, where Cat crawls through their body, sheds his skin, and pops out through Dog's mouth like some sort of permutation of the Thing. All of this after they started doing awful, torturous things to each other's teeth. And they made this for kids. In another episode, Dog becomes insanely buff, like so much so that it reminds me a little bit of the beefy Joker fight from Arkham Asylum. And it's not just like Dog gets big and lives his life. He gets huge, takes power from Cat, and then goes on a crazy roid-style rage bender. Then there was that time that CatDog was forcibly turned into one of the most hideous clowns of all time. That was fun. CatDog is such a crazy creature to start with, and in classic Nickelodeon style, it gets taken to some weird nightmare fuel extremes. Kids have powerful imaginations and are more likely to accept whatever's thrown their way, but geez, imagine running into a real-life version of this hybrid hellion. Coming in at number 4, we've got Angelica's Worst Nightmare. On that note, let's discuss another Nickelodeon nightmare. Remember Rugrats? I'd always thought the babies were a little funny looking, and some of the adults were hideous, of course, but none of that ever truly bothered me. Maybe the hairless Cynthia doll caused some negative reactions, but otherwise it's just a goofy kids show. Well, most of the time. See, Angelica is a bit of a loudmouth with a lot of opinions on things that her brain can't possibly comprehend. But what she does know is that babies are terrifying, especially when they can take over your life. As a parent, a baby can be either a blessing or a curse, depending on how you look at it. For a spoiled only child, it is the end of the glory days. And through these very same child-sized eyes, a baby sibling can be a terrifying monster, which is exactly what Angelica dreams up in her worst nightmare. Angelica's mother, Charlotte, brings up the possibility of having another baby, spooking the heck out of her daughter. After realizing that her folks will have less time to pay attention to the most important person, her, Angelica descends into a deep, dark nightmare. Babies. Who needs them, right? In this bad dream, nobody recognizes Angelica. They're all too focused on the new baby. And this baby is a real monster. First of all, it is ugly. And you might think that I have some sort of prejudice against babies and their looks, but no, this is just an especially ugly Rugrat. Then it speaks in the voice of a full-grown man, telling young Angelica that she's got to skedaddle. From here, this little baby grows to the size of an adult and chases her around the house. The growth doesn't stop here either, and eventually it's a big enough baby to pick up a car and swallow Angelica whole. That is indeed monstrous. It's animated in such a stilted way, too. It's an absolutely terrifying procession of images, and while it's a relatively common story for kids about to gain new siblings, it is wholly disturbing in many ways. Coming in at number 3, we've got Earthmover. Now, there are plenty of different villains to choose from in the Batman universe. Some are scarier than others, with standouts like Scarecrow and Professor Pig really dialing up the horror. However, a lot of the biggest, baddest villains are left out or neutered in the animated versions of Batman. If you want grit or gore, head to the comics. If you want to work on your Bane impression, find Tom Hardy. But every once in a while, some real shit makes it into the animated series. This is especially apparent in Batman Beyond. Of course, the art style is much darker than a lot of the other comic book series, but the real horror comes from futuristic technology that is so often employed. Bane overdoses on his own venom, and the Joker leaves folks with terrifying grins, and there's all sorts of surprising body horror in Beyond. But it's hard to imagine a monster more terrifying than Earthmover. At the climax of this story, we learn that a man that we once presumed was dead is actually totally dead. In fact, his daughter discovers his emaciated corpse. However, he's managed to become undead with the help of copious amounts of chemical waste. His remains are reanimated by some filthy materials, and he begins to rampage. Somehow the chemicals keep his spirit alive and attached to this rotten body and grant him additional powers as well. This corpse dad even summons a giant monster made of earth to kidnap and hold his daughter hostage. The episode even ends with very little closure, so like all good horror movie villains, we don't know exactly what became of Earthmover. His glowing green eyes will remain burned into my soul forever though. Coming in at number 2, we've got Larry Debug. Forgive me if you don't recall this creature, but I had to bring him up. Technically, Larry himself isn't a cartoon, he's a puppet, but he introduces tale after terrifying tale in an anthology series that probably molded my young mind more than I realized. Larry Debug is one of 2 hosts hanging out at Ted's Diner, a retro restaurant in the middle of nowhere. The other is a slimy maggot named Maurice, but I digress. This is the starting place for many of the animated tales of horror that make up the YTV series Freaky Story. This awful blue beetle has more stories than you can imagine, always prefaced with, "This is a true story. It happened to a friend of mine." And while Larry himself might not be all that scary, at least if you're not afraid of puppets or bugs, the spooky potential is always there. The stories told range all over, from freaky misfortune to fiendish creatures to disgusting foods. Each one is animated in a unique style, and like with any anthology, there are gems and duds, but the possibility of watching something truly horrific was always there. And like Larry always says, just because they never happened doesn't mean they ain't true. And finally at number 1, we've got the Walrus. Oh man. Picture this. You're a kid at home watching a lovely Swiss animated program on VHS. Or maybe you're at a friend's house and taking in some television. Either way, a friendly, sassy, adorable claymation penguin has your attention. It's Pingu. What a classic, right? Newt and all that jazz. You're learning about sharing and forgiveness and respecting your parents when all of a sudden something every child fears happens. Pingu gets lost. It's a dream sequence, but still. Kids don't know how to navigate. They freak out when they can't find their parents. This is already a scary situation. But for those of us who thought that would be the fearful peak, what happened next was almost unimaginable. While lost, out of nowhere, a gigantic walrus appears. And this is no cute, cuddly, mustachioed fellow. This is a terrifying, uncanny valley monstrosity. It's almost obscene how awful it looks. This walrus has big, glossy eyes, a nasty mustache, and worst of all, human teeth. Compared to literally anything else in the Pingu universe, this walrus is the embodiment of all nightmares. Add in an evil, deep and dark laugh, and you've got a monster that will never leave any child's mind. Why did they design it like this? Why did it appear out of nowhere? Why was this episode so upsetting to children everywhere? We may never know. But by all means, return to watching your cute penguin show with the knowledge that at any moment a revolting beast may climb up out of the background. My goodness. Most of these shows were largely palatable to all audiences, lulling viewers into a false sense of security before sucker punching them with scares. I'm sure plenty of neuroses found their root here. What did you think of the list? What childhood monsters stayed with you all these years? How many of these do you remember? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more sandy ones from the top 5 scary kids shows with dark origins. XX Italian Vamp Princess XX says the old man in Courage was not named Eugene, his name was Eustace. Slip of the tongue, and my script apparently. Thanks for pointing that out. Carlos Quezada says, Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. And you are absolutely right. I mean, the whole show is based around death following 2 children. It's hard to get darker than that. Danny Duvall says, Keegan looks like a background character in Napoleon Dynamite. See, that's exactly what I'm going for. I'm glad it's getting across. Shallow says, Mr. Meaty was one of the creepiest shows I've ever watched, and they need to make a scary theory video about it. Oh man, come on down to Mr. Meaty where friends meet to eat meat. That show is nuts. I still think about that crispy hand episode. Helix Jovian says, I now see 6 men with a coffin in my room. Tell me why they're here, Keegan. I think you might have forgotten that you work in a morgue. Get back to embalming. And Albert Scoot says moral oral. Yeah, that one's not really for kids, but you know, thanks for trying. And that's all the time we have for today. Before I shake a beer can and a paint mixer, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more late realizations. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.